Hello and welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the Ælfric Homily Project. I am your guide for this supplementary lecture. I'm your Lachrio, your teacher um, for this. Liam Grammaticus, you could call me, or rather, Wilhelm Grammaticus or Wilhelm. Um, Actually, the name Liam, which is just a shortening of William, for those unaware, is not attested in Old English, actually. If it was attested, it should be Wilhelm, Will and Helm, right? Which sounds very similar to the German, right? But it's only attested as Wilhelm, and that's only really in the 11th century when William is a popular name in, say, Normandy. So, it should just be Wilhelm rather than Wilhelm. So, anyways, I'm of course Liam, just QD Hall, and today we're going to go over some notes. I'm going to keep this one short, actually. So, let me share my screen. But we're going to go over some stuff in the creation homily. Here we are, creation, the beginning of all things. I want to keep this one short because this is later in May and I need to get my focus onto Pentecost, which is early in June. So, the beginning of all things. This is beginning of creation is technically the name for it. It's first series homily, and it has the longest intro, and it says creation to be recited whenever. So this is one of those homilies that doesn't have a specific day to put it on, right? A specific day in the year, pretty much, right? This is supposed to be anytime. And now this May, I think, is okay here. Ascension would have made a lot of sense if Ælfric had done one on Bede. Bede's feast day is on the 25th, 26th, or 27th. We'll go over that in a second. But yeah, there's a few things you could have done here. I think this creation one would have worked really well in March as well. But as if you watch my Septuagesima to Lent video, Locking Away Alleluias in spring, you can see why this would be appropriate for March, as that is the month it was considered creation began, actually. So listen to this in March if you would like, March 18th even if you want. And so this is a note actually from Louisa. Louisa, I don't know how to say his name still. Anyways, this first homily offers a whirlwind tour of the most important moments in Christian history, from the creation and fall of the angels to the death and resurrection of Jesus. Its focus is on Old Testament material and includes brief accounts of the creation and fall of the angels, Adam and Eve, Noah and the flood, Tower of Babel, the rise of Hebrews, the Annunciation, the ministry of Jesus, crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension. The homily is not designated for any particular occasion, but its form and content are catechetical, designed for simple or newly baptized Christians. And so in that case, I felt like this was, because of that, it was actually a good one, because it covers much more actually than the beginning of creation. Creation is only a small portion of it, as it was so succinctly summarizes. There's a lot actually covered in this homily. And if you've listened to the homily, read it, translated it yourself, you'll recognize that. You'll notice also when I did the translation this time is that I differentiated between thou and you, which I normally don't do. I don't have a problem with it, actually. I think most people who are familiar or reading scriptures, modern English scriptures, at least, would be pretty familiar with some archaisms. Honestly, I think the archaisms make it sound better often. When I read something that's written in something like much more colloquial modern English, it doesn't really work as effectively in a lot of cases. So for dust thou art, or so saying for you are dust, right, for example, it doesn't quite have that same thing. So, but there is a lot actually in this homily that is not in most of the homilies we've looked at so far, where there's actual a difference between saying the thou and you. I really only kept it in the dialogue, whether that's God or the devil speaking. But regardless, I did keep it in there. For Pentecost, there's actually a good amount of quoting scripture as well, and so I might have more thous in there as well. I do think getting used to the idea of thou actually does help, as modern English only has one you, right? It has a singular you and a plural you, which is very makes things hard. It's why we say things like y'all, which would be unnecessary if we still had thou, for example. So anyways, so one of the things we go over actually is the war in heaven. So again, this is from the Luza edition, his notes says, much of the narrative of Lucifer's rebellion and fall comes from Isaiah 14:12-15. And then, how you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, who rose in the morning, how you are fallen to the earth, that wounded the nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. And I will sit in the mountain in the covenant in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the height of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. But you will be brought down to hell into the depth of the pit. And the narrative was much embellished in both theological and popular discourse in the Middle Ages. Not a super popular motif, I'd say in modern Christianity, but in some sects it definitely is more popular. Interesting that we see it here, though. Also, the idea that life is in the blood and not the soul for animals, right? So the idea that life of animals resides not in the soul but in the blood is found in several sources, including Cassiodorus, De Anima. Its ultimate source is Leviticus 7:14. And then here, this is the King James Version. This is the original King James Version, actually, I should point out. For it is the life of all flesh, the blood of it is for the life thereof. Therefore I said unto the children of Israel, ye shall eat the blood of no manner of flesh, for the life of all flesh is the blood thereof. Whosoever eateth it shall be cut off. So you notice the shall be is a contraction here. There's missing an L. Manner has one in. And whosoever, the V is a U, which is pretty normal for the time. If you want something like the original published version of the King James Version of the Bible, you can get this facsimile, the Holy Bible, 1611 edition. I don't know who published this, I guess Hendrickson Bibles. And it's pretty neat. It's really easy to read. As far as, I feel like it's really easy to read if you're familiar with King James Version. I think, actually, if you want practice, like I would say, like a modern English speaker, if they want practice reading more archaic version of English, I think the King James Version of the Bible is exceptionally good for this. And most modern King James versions, though, actually correct things like this. Like they'd spell manner how we would spell it, and shall and be would be two separate words, and whosoever would have a V there instead of a U. I think getting used to even this facsimile edition helps even a little more. And that's just minor stuff, of course. All right. So you will be like the gods. What's interesting in this homily is that Ælfric says you will be like the angels, right? It's actually written as well the same way as you will be like the angels in Hexateuch, but all sources and commentaries that Ælfric would have pulled from says gods. Why he doesn't say gods here, I'm not entirely sure, unless maybe he was worried about his flock being confused with some pagan deities. That is a problem that pops up in Anglo-Saxon sources, right? As people go back to worshiping pagan gods or whatever. And so maybe that's why he would do it here, though it is pretty late in the medieval period. We're getting to the end of the Anglo-Saxon period when Ælfric is writing and getting close to the High Middle Ages, where most people in Europe at this point are converted, and even the Scandinavian peoples are going to be converted. It's really only going to be people in the East, like some Slavs and people in the Baltics, that are going to take a while to be converted. The Lithuanians are the last to convert in Europe. Besides, I think there's still one like really minor group of people in Russia, I think, that are still technically pagan, and I don't remember the name actually off the top of my head. So, but this is of course Genesis 3:5. So Ælfric puts angels in here. Not entirely sure why. All right. So Bede actually is not one of the main sources for this homily, but I wanted to go over Bede real quick, as the homily came out on the 25th, which in some sects, that is the feast day for Bede. This video is actually going to come out on the 27th, which in other sects is the feast day of Bede. And so it felt appropriate. So Gregory the Great and Alcuin are sources for this homily. They're some of the bigger ones. But again, another common source is the Venerable Bede, Saint Bede the Venerable. He is the father of English history. He was a monk known for his writing of history and the science Computus, which is kind of figuring out the calendar. I talked a little bit about Computus back in my Christmas video, way back in December. It's the science behind like how medieval like timekeeping and calendars work. And actually, the thumbnail on the reading for this is from Bede's The Reckoning of Time manuscript. So he is just a monk, pretty much. He served at the monastery of St. Peter at Jarrow in Northumbria. Supposedly, he went into service at the monastery when he was 7 years old. He was probably that was probably designed from the beginning. If his Bede means prayer, it's not a very typical Anglo-Saxon name. He's probably some younger noble's child that was going to go to the monastery pretty much since his birth. That was the idea, right? He was considered one of the most intelligent men in Europe at the time, maybe a key hand behind the Codex Amiatinus, which was made when Bede was at Wearmouth Jarrow and was going to be a gift to the Pope. It never actually made it to Rome. I forget the brother's name who was on the way to deliver it, passed, and then it was held in northern Italy for several decades, several centuries. I believe it's still there, actually. It costs about 300 cows or calves to be slaughtered and the skins to make. It is a complete Vulgate Bible, which is insanely rare for the medieval period. You mostly get Gospels, or you get like something like the Hexateuch, or you get like Psalteries are very common. But in fact, I think it is the source that the Catholic Church still uses for the Latin, the Vulgate Bible, is the Codex Amiatinus. And so this guy, he's writing lots of fun and good stuff. He died on the Feast of Ascension that morning, May 26th in 735. His feast day then, though, like I said, is generally held on May 25th or May 27th. I believe some of the idea behind the May 25th one, at least, is that he probably, according to our calculations today, where we have our 24-hour day and midnight is the marker, right, for the next day, he probably would have died like late in the day on May 25th. But in the period, they would have considered that May 26th because night had fallen, right? And so we don't calculate that the same way. To me, it still seems like May 26th. You could easily calculate that way. The way they do medieval hours as well. In some ways makes more sense, but doesn't help with calculating things when you want to be precise, I guess. An hour-long, 60-minute hour does help in some sense. But I think I would recommend, if you get Bede's History of the English People, or Church, Ecclesiastical History, whatever, it's got a few names, but it's free online. You can read it. You can listen to it on audiobook. Just look it up on YouTube. Book 2, Chapter 13 has his most famous anecdote about King Edwin of Northumbria going to talk to his wise men, pretty much his counselors, and this one who's almost certainly some priest of Odin. His name is Coifi, which is where the word Coif, which is like hood, and the hooded one is a common name for Odin, or Woden in the English case. But he has a sparrow flying through the meat hall anecdote, which is beautiful. Shows the just how short life is, pretty much, and what comes before, what comes after, and the idea that Christian scripture actually can tell us more about that than, say, that the pagan gods could. And so then, therefore, Coifi goes and destroys all idols after this, because everyone's going to be Christian now. So whether that's completely accurate to what actually happened, the book does read sort of like scripture, and it's very, very informative in a lot of ways. So as far as early English history is concerned, I did want to go over this, and I wanted to point out that this is the Northumbrian dialect, which is why it looks a little different than what you're probably used to. So, Fortham Nedfara Nani Wirthit Thunksnotra Thanhimthar Sia to Imhidganai Ar his Hinunga What his Gasta Godas Afta Ivlas after Deothai, Deomid Werthai. A little, honestly, it's difficult for me to read the Northumbrian stuff, but we looked at this a little bit when we went over the Dream of the Rood, actually. But this is Bede's death song. So did he actually say this? We're not 100% sure, but this is actually, apparently, according to some sources, his last words that he pretty much composed on his deathbed, right? And this actually is found in up to 40 sources, and so this is more than any other Old English poem. It's very short, as you can see. This is the whole thing, and this is my translation here. Before the needful journey, none is wiser than him that reflects before his spirit departs hence, what good or bad he has done, or what judgment he will receive after death. It's very, very short and very sweet one, and it does reflect things. I think it reflects this idea of death and preparing to meet your creator rather well. Of course, this needful journey is death. It's necessary, right? You can't avoid it. Um, and then thinking over your life is pretty normal death thing. So there is that. So we also, one thing that is going on right now, pretty much, as Ascension is this Thursday, the 29th of May. The Rogation days are then the 3 days leading up to it. So Monday the 26th, Tuesday the 27th, and Wednesday the 28th. And this is all taken from Parker's Winters in the World, which I actually have out now this time. So Winters in the World, pages 156 to 162. And it says, in the medieval church, Rogation Tide was a time for prayer, fasting, and procession around the countryside, asking for God's blessing on the land and the crops of the future harvest. The origins of Rogation Tide lie in the 5th century Gaul, around 470, when Mamertus, Bishop of Vienne, instituted 3 days of penance before Ascension Day in response to troubles afflicting his city. And so it's attested from the 8th century in Britain, it's about practicing collective penance, hollowing physical spaces, preaching. It is called Yebedachas prayer days, or in some Old English sources, it's also the name Rogation is taken from rogare, which means to ask or pray. So again, prayer days, pretty much. That's Latin, of course, though. And then we have the Gangadachas, so gang days is a term for it. I think more recently, but it is from this Old English Gangadachas, which means walking days or going days, right? And not something I really am familiar with at all. I've never seen anything for Rogation, but 'tis the season. All right, so wanted to mention that. Doesn't really have much to do with the homily we went over for May, but it is here. All right, and I want to talk about this real quick, the Ingvaeonic nasal spirit law. So Ingvaeonic is the North Sea Germanic. This would be English, Frisian, and Saxon. They are considered related. They're part of Ingvaeonic would be a branch of West Germanic. So if you have Germanic, West Germanic, Ingvaeonic, right? So other like West Germanic language would be like Old High German, right? And so then modern High German, for example, would be not Ingvaeonic, but it would be West Germanic. And so we do have special sound changes that affect these Ingvaeonic, just like there are special sound changes that affect other ones that don't affect Ingvaeonic. But in this case, we have one that actually it comes up in this homily. So we have nasals before fricatives or spirants. That's another name for fricatives, really, were lost. So with the preceding vowel originally becoming nasalized, and almost always this nasalization being lost later. Before any written sources are down, pretty much. So it would be early. So pretty much when you're going from Proto-Germanic to like this Proto-West Germanic, particularly this North Sea Germanic dialect, and then when we finally get our sources down, it's just Old English, Old Frisian, and Old Saxon, and even that nasalization stuff is just completely gone at this point. So, for example, the Proto-Germanic Munthas becomes in something like a Proto-West Germanic, North Sea Germanic, Proto-like dialect, Mutha. So the ooh would be nasalized, ooh, like kind of like you often nasalize your vowels in French, for example. So Mutha, and then just be muth in Old English. And this is, of course, mouth, right? But this comes up, I think, in the word tithe and tenth, because tithe is exactly following this law, actually, right? The loss of this nasal, so the n and ten, but we still have both words in modern English. So tithe is a result of this, right? So we have teoda in the Old English form. During the Middle English period, though, the ordinal, which is tithe, of course, as opposed to cardinal 10, was aligned with the cardinal, resulting in tenth, right? The same happened with 9, for example, and ninth, nichon, nichotha in Old English, but neither, ninth, or whatever, did not survive into modern English. And the reason that you can kind of see that it doesn't survive is it there's nothing to be associated with. So tithe really only survives in like a church sense, right? And tenth survives pretty much elsewhere, where everyone's like, oh, we're assuming that tithe should be tenth because I know the number 10, just like 9 should go into ninth rather than neath or whatever, right? Because I know the number 9, there's an N there. And so it's just kind of rebracketed almost. And so again, we don't have ninth or neath, but if you read in some old English sources, of course, it's going to be nichotha. But in some Middle English sources, it's also going to be something like a nith or nitha or something like that. But we don't get it in modern English. So some other examples that would be us. So us would be like uns in many other Germanic languages. We have soft, so soft, which I believe in, I can look it up real quick. In Old Norse, yes, still has that in. So I'm on the wrong. There we go. Look it up. Let's see. Soft comes from a Proto-West Germanic "somft," so the m is lost. That m is lost, and then in Old Norse it's sumur, so you still have that m in it. So, and same with samar in Old Norse. It looks like so. Anyways, and then tooth, of course, and you can see this one in the word dentures or dent or dent in French. Where that still that in is still present. That doesn't, of course, that is coming via Latin. It doesn't have this ingvaonic nasal spirant law affecting it, and so tooth would have been something more like tonth, and like an early Old English, late North Sea Germanic. So, and then same with goose, like gans, right? It should have that in it, but it doesn't. So, and it hasn't had it in there for a long time. All right, so let me ask you a question. You ever notice how people sometimes say ax rather than ask? This is a very common form of metathesis, which is, or metathesis. Metathesis, I've always heard it, but this is actually a very common one in modern English, right? It's considered improper to say ax rather than ask, though I remember saying it some as a child, but it's actually a rather regular aspect of Black American vernacular. But this is actually nothing new, and actually you might have seen it in the homily that instead of askion, which is the exact same word ask, right? To ask is askion in Old English, is actually often spelled as oxion, or axion as it is spelled in this homily, A-X-I-A-N. And X, of course, just a k sound rather than the S k, so k sound as it's supposed to be. So it is actually metastasized pretty normally, and this is not a new thing at all. It's been happening for over 1,000 years. So just thought that was interesting. It's never stuck, right? This metastasization has never stuck, right? The common way of saying ask is not ax, right? While other things have become commonly metastasized, like the Old English word for bird, as we've seen, is brid, right? And we don't say brid, right? We say bird, and that's normal for every dialect as far as I'm aware. If there's a dialect that says brid still, let me know, but that's pretty normal. So, and then one thing you may have also noticed, if you're paying attention, we have the word neersnawang again in this homily. So, of course, this is almost always translated as paradise. That's how I've always translated it before. This time I decided to translate it the field of contentment, because I felt like that was just fine. Regardless if that is exactly the etymology behind the Neorks part. We know Wang is obviously field or plain, but like the Neorksna is a really confounding. There's a good chance the Anglo-Saxon writers didn't know what it meant either, besides that it was like something about paradise, right? And we have this Wang idea associated with, I mean, we've seen it in Gothic and Old Norse and Old Saxon, right? So that something nice about this word, but in Old English you have this Neorksna attached to it. And so we actually have McKinney here. He says the meaning of the name has usually been connected with the Old Irish nert, strength. So the powerful one is talking about Nerthus here, who is a figure mentioned in Tacitus's Germania in chapter 40, particularly if you go read that. I don't think I have my copy up here. No. Okay. But it might be related to Old English ye nerth, which is contented, and nerksnawang, paradise, literally field of contentment, or to the word north, deity of the northern people, or belonging to the underworld. So again, this is just like a guess, and it's one of the guesses, and McKinney makes that pretty obvious that this is a guess, right? He mentioned several things here. So this is a picture of Njordr, is actually mentioned in the Njörður right here. This is 17th century, so pretty late, and he's holding a bag of wind. And this is a figure associated with the sea, and there's actually an association with the sea as well. Actually, if you read about Nerthus and Tacitus Germania, the interesting thing is Nerthus is said to be a woman, a goddess, and Njörður is a man. But etymologically, their names are exactly the same. Nerthus just being a Nertus, rather, is how Tacitus probably would have said it. There is no dental fricative in Latin. It seems like they're exactly the same. They would be the same names. And so it's just an interesting, just a confusion there, pretty much how that even connects. So if you want to read more about it, Germania is interesting ethnography, but it's Roman, so it's heavily biased, and Tacitus is unnecessarily hateful and doesn't make sense sometimes, but it's still very informative in other ways. So we also have this idea of Ent, Etins, Jotuns, and Troy. We can connect them, I promise. Ent is the one that appears in this homily, if I remember correctly. So the Old English word for giant is Ent, right? Ald Enter your work, right? Old Ent work, right? Is a thing we see in Old English poetry. So like the Old Norse word, though, which is Jotun, does not actually denote inherently anything of larger size, like the word giant does in modern English, which comes from Latin, of course. Rather, the word is related to the word eat. It may be from some taboo against cannibalism, the giants being the enemy of the gods, at least in Norse myth. They're just the eaters, and they're pretty much always just the same size as the gods, right? So it's interesting. Ent seems to be related. Etin is very obviously the same thing as Jotun. Ent is potentially then again also metathesis there. So these giants of the Old Testament being confused for gods which does come up in the homily, is a pretty typical conflation for Christian writers, explaining away the mistakes of their pagan ancestors, right? Right. It's not just the people in the Old Testament that believe these giants were gods. It's it's pretty normal for our ancestors just a couple hundred years ago to believe stuff like this. So, right, we have this is from where is it? It's the Prose Edda, actually, by Snorri Sturluson, Jesse Byock translation. But it says, one of the kings of Troy was named Munan or Menon. He was married to Troan, the daughter of Priam, the chief king. They had a son who was named Tror, the one we call Thor. And so just equating Thor with these giants, right, that rule in Troy, so they're really just Trojans. Actually, the idea of connecting with Troy is more of a later medieval thing rather than an early medieval idea, but you do see it in something like Lachaman's Brut or Wace's Brut before that. Wace would have been a northern French author, Langdoil, right? But he wrote the Brut. Lachaman writes it in English shortly later. And this, of course, is called the Brut because it's named after Brutus of Troy, who's the guy that Britain is named after. Really not, right? This Brutus guy is a fiction, but it was cool to connect yourself in this classical way like the Aeneid does, right? Then we have the idea of possession, devils, and how do these connect to Odin or Woden? So Wode, in Old English, it pretty much means crazy, insane, mad, rabid, or enraged, right? Okay, when's modern Wode, and also the name of the pagan god Woden, right? Which is, of course, Odin. It's just the Old English version of his name, Odin in Old Norse, which is where we commonly get Odin from. Old Norse has the loss of W and Ya after. I think I put the note in here, actually. Let's see. So yeah, Old Norse lost initial ya and wa before back and round vowels, and so you lose that in Old Norse Odin. But and so what we do have here though is this does in Old English Wode here then as it appears in this homily doesn't have a direct association with possession or with devils, but it is in tandem actually with the word. So we have Ælfric. He says Deorvul seokum and Wodum he salda yewit. So to the possessed and the mad, he gave sense. And so we have this idea that the mad and the possessed are kind of the same boat, right? They are related, right? This is all the same idea here, pretty much. So we do have the idea of Gothic wolves. This would be a voiced and don't forget same with like Proto-Germanic. So possessed by a devil appears in the Gothic version of the Bible a few times. And then again, so we have Old Norse Olden brothers Wili or Vili, and later Old Norse Will and Ve or Way, which just means holy. It's related to the word Old English whale we've gone over before. And again, doesn't have. They all would have had the initial "wa" sound, but Odin, this is a back and round vowel, or rather a round vowel, and so we lose that. So we do have Devilsick, silk rather is literally devil sick, right? But it means possessed, and it's a very common word for possession. Also, I wanted to go over quickly Virago and Eve, as it's interesting to read this and say, oh, I'm going to call her Virago, and then also say, oh, I'm going to call her Eve. Most things I've read just call her Eve outright, right? And so Virago is a Latin word, while Eve, of course, comes from the Hebrew, Chava. It is a transliteration coming via Greek, pretty much, right? So Greek says something like Ewa, Eva, and then it comes into Latin, it comes into English as Eve, right? Greek does sometimes translate the name Chava rather than just transliterating it, which would be Zoe, Zoe, right? Modern English, which just means the same thing. So, then we have, which just means like life, essentially. And then we have, and so then Virago essentially means manly woman, as you can actually see the ver there, the wir in classical Latin is the word for man, actually. Just like wir, just is like manliness, but is where the word virtue comes from. So essentially, in societies that viewed women as lesser, this is actually a compliment, right? To call someone a Virago. This woman was as good as a heroic man, essentially, which you call him a Virago. Though Eve really often gets this disdain in Christianity, which you can see in the homily, actually. She still gets this nickname, right? Presumably one of praise, this Virago name. Many see Eve as wicked, of course. Many would see Adam as rather wicked. Most Christians, I would say, that's the more popular belief. Because of the idea of original sin, which is kind of hammered into shape by the Neoplatonism of Augustine, which won out over Pelagianism, which is largely by most Christians considered heresy these days. But not all sects actually believe in this idea of original sin and baptizing infants and inherent guilt from Adam and Eve's transgressions. So, and then we have this wonderful Durer engraving of Adam and Eve. Oh, also, this does come up actually. So, Famna, in the homily, I think I've seen it mostly translated as female. It really doesn't mean this at all. It really just means woman or young woman, even more often than not, or like virgin, even. So it just means a woman, essentially, and it's not. It is not related to the Latin word femina, which is where we get the word feminine, right, or female. So I think I put woman in there because it felt more accurate, but also I think it was going to confuse people less, right? Because it's not related to Latin feminine. Okay, so then quickly some words of note. We have Lichtberend, which is light bearing, which is a calque of Lucifer, just the light bearer, right? And we have Grama, which is anger, wrath, rage, fiend, demon, imp, puck as well. In this case, it's just anger and wrath, right? It's like the sword Graham in the Volsung saga. So, and then we have Ivera, which is companion or fellow traveler, quite literally fera, as in like fair, to places. Companion is actually a calque of the Germanic Hlafenes, right? But which means like someone you break bread with, essentially. But in Old English, you have companion is not so much someone you break bread with; it's just your fellow traveler. Is the more common word. We also have sona, which is where the word soon comes from, but it means immediately, forthwith, at once, right? Same in like Gothic. We also have rad, which is decision, counsel, advice, plant, stuff like that, right? And it's where the word reed comes from. It is related to the modern word reed as well. And then we have ibihan, which is to bend, curve, turn, subdue. It is related to bagel. Maybe some homework to figure out how that is related to bagel. We have wohnung, which is residence, a home, or a dwelling. This actually does survive in a modern word as well. It's very similar to this Old English one, but it can also kind of mean life or existence as well too. Then more, I'm just going to quickly go through these. We have lam, which is loam, modern English loam, but it also just means clay. And then we have ilifastan, which is to make alive, right? To live fasten, pretty much, right? So quicken or animate as well. We have sweltan, which literally just means to die. And so it's interesting. This, I think it pops up twice in the homily where it's just to die to death, right? Which is just I translate it as like perish or to suffer death. It's an interesting construction to me, but sweltan is where the idea of sweltering comes from, right? When it's sweltering out, you're literally dying, I guess. And so you have words like this though that come to mean different things in modern English, like starve, right? Literally just means to die, right? But we don't use starve, right? In that just sense of dying anymore. So I also have deor, which is where the modern word deer comes from, but it really just means any animal in Old English. We have sund, which is where the word sound, as in like the Puget Sound, right? So this body of water comes from, and it means like it can mean like the sea or ocean, but it also just means swimming. And this homily just means swimming. Then we have hrada, which is fast or quick, soon, early, etc. This is where the modern English word wraith comes from, which is really more of a poetic word. I think it's a lovely word, but yes. Anyways, we have meta, which is where the word meat comes from, which if you've read something like the King James Version, you know that meat just means food, right? And that's what it means in Old English. It doesn't mean flesh. It just means food in general. Also, fell, which there is a modern English word fell. It's exactly the same, actually, but not a very common word. And then you have, it just means skin, right, essentially. So related to the word pelt, related to the word film. So they also have klaman, which is modern word clean. I've never seen used ever, but it means to smear. We have wed, which is the pledge or contract. Sorry, I don't know, not contact, but or covenant, which is where the word wedding comes from. We have chlaf, which means bread. Essentially, it is where we get the countable noun of loaf. Compare it with the uncountable noun of bread. I always wow, I'm very tired. Sorry, I always mess this one up when I was young, as we have many loaves and much bread. So many is for countable things and much is for uncountable things. And I remember my father correcting me all the time, right? Because I'd say something like much loaves, right? But it's really many loaves is the correct way of saying it, right? And much bread, not many bread, right? You wouldn't really say many bread. I would say you probably get it the other way around. You'd say much, something countable, which you should be saying many. But anyways, then you also have chreflium, which is the rough kind of things. It's like, so leprous, right? It's from the word chreof, which just means rough, right? And then we have lawan, which is to betray or to reveal. And it's related to the word lewd, actually, which I think is interesting. And we also have shukka, which means evil spirit, demon, or devil. I think it's shukka. I think it does show up in the homily as shukka, or sheuka. So I wanted to go quickly over some supplementary material besides Bede's stuff, his little death song. We have probably the easiest to access Old English piece of poetry right here, Cædmon's Hymn. Okay, it's not the most popular like Bede's death song. It's not as short as Bede's death song, but this is it. It's the whole thing. It's 9 lines, and it's very accessible. You can read this in a variety of different dialects. You can read it in the Northumbrian. You can read it in Latin, but here is a standardized West Saxon version. It is like the first poem you pretty much ever go over, right? If you're taking Old English class, essentially. And I do think it has some use, actually, for creation homily. So I want to go over real quick. Let's just read it real quick. Nu shulan herian helvon riches waard, metodos machtan is moje thank. Werk wuter vader swache wundra je was. Echadrichten, ora stalda. He aras shop hielder baronum, heel de grofa hali schepen, Thamidan yard man kinas ward, Echadrichten, after Theoda, Firam foldan Freya al Michti. Actually, I have this one memorized. I like memorizing poems. I should do that more often. But let's look at it real quick. And I think there's some interesting stuff here. So we'll talk a little bit about Cædmon in a second as well and who that was. This is really the only thing like that we can strictly attest to him, though. There, you'd see if you read like things that are a century, maybe 2 centuries old, you'll see more attested to him. But really, this is the only thing solid. So we have now we must praise, and you'll notice actually there's no way in here where there could easily be, and in some versions you will actually have the way, nu way, shulon, herian, right? Anyway, so now we must praise, so must again, shulan, so now we shall praise, but must is we ought to, we have to kind of. Herian, praise, and then Heovun reaches award, so the heaven reaches guardian, keeper, the kingdom of heaven's guardian, right? And then we have metodos machta, and his mode thunk, the might of the measurer. Method is a very common word for God here, but it's very strictly, you'll notice so far that this is going to continue through the whole poem. There's very little Christian imagery throughout here. This very easily works in a Christian sense, but also could potentially also work in a pagan sense. It's just talking about a creation myth, right? It's not particularly the Christian creation myth, and that's probably on purpose. Okay, this would have come from a time of conversion, and this is a song you could sing, and the Christians would enjoy it, and the pagans would enjoy it. So anyways, methodode, or method rather, just means, it can mean fate, actually, it can mean like destiny, and so forth, but it also just means like creator and maker or God, right? Literally, measurer is a very common translation for it. And his mind thoughts, which is interesting. We have the mode, you think, but I mean, obviously the mode is there actually for the alliteration purposes. We have werk wuler father, so the work of the glory father, as each of wonders, right, miracles or whatever. Eternal Lord, beginning established, he first shaped for the children of men. Barunum is children, for the children. And then Yelda is a word meaning man, but it's only used in the plural, and I haven't seen it a lot, but Yelda does mean men, collectively, people, I guess, humankind. And then Heovon Torova, so he first shaped the children of heaven as a roof, the holy shaper. Then Middle Earth, mankind's guardian, eternal Lord, after bestowed. Fyram foldan, Freya, so frach, almighty. So he had then established Middle Earth, mankind's guardian, the eternal Lord, after bestowed the lands to men, Lord Almighty. You also have Firas here. So Firam is another, very common in plural, just to mean men as well. So 2 interesting words here for mankind, but that's what they mean. So you can see in this actually that the poem was kind of referring back to itself a little bit. Then Middle Earth, mankind's guardian, eternal Lord, after bestowed the lands to men, Lord Almighty, right? And so if you want to read more about it, actually, I'd recommend getting the 8 Old English Poems again. The commentary on Cædmon's hymn is definitely, rather short but worthwhile, at least as a beginning guide to it. And it's just a nice poem as well. One thing I want to see if you notice as well, though. So Cædmon, this poem does survive in about 21 manuscripts, I believe, which is a lot more than most, considering most survive in unique copies just in one place, right? So while not as much as Bede's Death Song, that's still a lot. Cædmon himself was a shepherd under St. Hild and was apparently ignorant of song. One night he fled and the hall and he went to sleep, right? And someone in this dream teaches him how to sing, pretty much, of creation, to have something to sing about when it's his turn, or when he gets a chance to sing, pretty much in these gatherings. And so pretty much by inspiration, he creates this hymn, Cædmon's hymn, right? And so whatever his name or life story may have been, the person who composed Cædmon's hymn recognizing the paradox of God raising the roof of heaven before building the floor of earth, the stuff of poetry. and a song about creation as the beginning of all miracles came to be seen as the miraculous beginning of all English Christian verse. And I do think that it is very lovely that pretty much the oldest English poetry we have, the first lines is, "Now we must praise the keeper of the kingdom of heaven," or "the keeper of the heaven reaches," or "the guardian of heaven," whatever, right? And very lovely. And also just this idea that, again, paradoxical, right? That heaven, or that in creation, what is first created is the roof, and then earth, right? And so it's like when you're building a building, do you build a roof first? No, that's the miracle of it, in a sense, right? That you could build this roof first. It doesn't make really any sense logically, but to God, it's just a miracle, right? So, and that of course is this is from St. Mary's Churchyard in Whitby over here on the right, and that is from the Raising the Roof and Cædmon's Hymn in the Journal of English and Germanic Philology. I don't believe it's in this one. No, it's not, but it's this journal, which is probably one of my favorite journals. I'm not currently subscribed because I'm broke, but when I have money sometime, hopefully in the future, that is a journal I'd subscribe to again. Hey, oh, did I miss? Oh yeah, I did. Okay. So then one last thing I wanted to go over, this very last bit. Again, we've looked at slightly looked at Old Saxon and very, very little of Gothic, but today I thought it would be a good time to go over another bit of creation, poetry, kind of. It's not actually really described as poetry, but that is the creation of Adam, or Adam's creation, in Old Frisian. Okay, so I took this from this book over here, An Introduction to Old Frisian by Rolf Brummer, who is someone we've looked at. In fact, the last time his article, Old English Crosswords, this is the key scholar on Old Frisian. And this book is relatively affordable. I believe I paid for like $40 about 5 years ago for it. So it does have like sections on morphology and phonology, of course, as any good philology grammar would, philologist grammar would, but then the reader with the glossary, of course, too. So this is my translation. Let me read it first, though. So we have God skop thina ersta menneska. That was Adam, von achta windum. That beneta von tha stena. That flask von thera eartha. That blood von tha wetra. Tha herta von that winda. Then thukta von that workum. That sweat von that dow. Tha lokar von that gersa. Tha agena von thera suna. And tha blerum und thine herga and tha schoper skoper Eva von sine riba Adamas liava. So you can see, I think, a relation here to Old English. Old Frisian is considered the closest language to Old English. Old Frisian, though, is recorded later. Besides some runic inscriptions, which Frisian would have shared this runic alphabet of Futhorc with Old English. This is stuff written down pretty much in the High Middle Ages, actually, like you see Old Norse sources are. So Old Norse would have been spoken at the same time as Old English, right? Your V's would have largely been W sounds still, right? But when we get Old Norse written down, it's actually later. It's actually after the Old English period has already ended, and same with Old Frisian. This is actually later. This is more High Middle Ages. So, so more time has actually elapsed in the case of this text than, say, Ælfric's stuff. And so we had God shaped, then first, the first man, that was Adam, and it took 8 kinds of matter. So the bones from the stone, the flesh from the earth, the blood from the water, the heart from the wind, the thoughts from the sky, the sweat from the dew, the locks, so the hair, from the grass. And this is a metathesis here. I think this is more closer to the original Proto-Germanic, where we have the R switching places. Very common. It's a liquid. R switches places pretty easily. So Gersa, this is like a gamma sound. Gersa. And then the eyes from the sun. And then he blew on them holy breath, and then created Eve from his rib, Adam's liava, right? So Leof, or whatever in Old English. So It's very similar, right? The Adamus, right? So it's just the genitive looks exactly the same in this case as well. So very similar. You can tell there's some spelling differences. The scope, I believe, is how it would have been said rather than scope. And those are the big one, I would say, between pronunciation differences. So um, anyways, that's pretty much it, actually, and that's about where I wanted to end it as far as time is concerned. We do actually have a codicology moment here, but I'm not gonna go into it this time because I don't have time. But if you would like to, it's actually the same exact manuscript that we've looked at for most of these homilies, as far as looking in manuscripts when we actually went and looked at the homily. All right, so it is the Bodleian Library manuscript, Bodleian 343. If you go to Folio 1 Recto, then you will find the beginning of the homily section, and that is where we can find this, the beginning of creation homily. And that is this link, so I'll try to put this link below because this link will take you exactly to that page rather than just somewhere on the manuscript, like the beginning of the manuscript, and I'm going to make you find it or something like that. No, so this link will take you right there. In fact, there is a good database for these homilies put together by one scholar who I am forgetting his name right now. So I actually referenced him in my very first video, but it is Chase Hakama. That's right. Okay, so Chase Hakama. I could probably even put that. What is the word? I'm really tired. Sorry. That the slide, the sheet, the spreadsheet that where it links all of them. So you won't just. I'll put this one here. This is very specific for the homily we're going over, but I'll link you the spreadsheet as well if you just want to get access to most of the manuscripts. Actually, this one. This has most of them. There's not a lot of manuscripts in the spreadsheet, but the spreadsheet's very handy. Actually, it's very nice of Chase to provide it on his website. The handy to bring you to the exact folio that you need. So, anyways, which is just page, the exact page. It's what we call page in a manuscript. So, anyways, thank you for watching. Hopefully you learned something here. Hopefully my mind is not too exhausted. That it proved of some use. It's been kind of a very busy time for me now. I'm in a very short amount of time. I'm trying to get this homily prepared, this presentation prepared, and then have the Pentecost homily ready. I'm still working on that, so hopefully it comes out on time. I think it will. I think I can manage that. So, anyways, again, if you have any questions, just let me know either in the comments or email me or get a hold of me somehow. And I will be glad to help. So really appreciate it. And thanks for stopping by the Ælfric Homily Project. And I'm Liam, Laureo Willem Grammaticus. Not so much, really. I probably don't deserve that title, Grammaticus, but signing off at least.